She slammed her hand down, and for a brief second, everything seemed fine. Then there was a pause, followed by a scream that cut sharply through the entire studio, instantly breaking the lighthearted tone of the segment. The incident took place in 2016 on one of Poland's most popular morning programs, Pytanie na śniadanie, which translates to Question for Breakfast. The show typically combines celebrity interviews, lifestyle segments, and light entertainment, creating a relaxed atmosphere for viewers starting their day. That day's segment featured illusionist Marcin Pol, often misreported online, a recurring guest known for performing risky visual tricks. He introduced a stunt commonly referred to as nail roulette, an illusion where several paper bags are placed upside down on a table, with one concealing a sharp nail standing upright while the others are empty. The participant must slam their hand down on each bag, trusting that the dangerous one will be avoided. It is the kind of trick designed to create tension and excitement, relying on precise setup and timing. But on this occasion, something went wrong. Co-host Marzyna Rogalska volunteered to take part, assuming, like everyone else, that the trick had been carefully prepared and was completely safe. In one moment, she was smiling and playing along with the performance. In the next, she brought her hand down onto the wrong bag, driving a 6-inch nail straight through her hand on live television. When she instinctively lifted her hand, the nail came up with it, leaving both the studio and viewers at home in shock. The broadcast quickly cut away, and for a short time, many viewers questioned whether what they had seen was real or part of an elaborate illusion. It was later confirmed that the injury was genuine. Rogalska was taken to the hospital, where she received treatment, and she later reassured viewers through a video message that, despite the severity of the moment, she had not suffered permanent damage. Even so, the incident remains one of the most shocking examples of a live television stunt going wrong, especially considering how easily the outcome could have been far more serious. Sometimes television becomes dangerous because of a single mistake. Other times, the danger is already there the moment the cameras start rolling. And that is exactly what makes the next show so hard to believe. In 1954, William Golding wrote Lord of the Flies, a novel about children stranded without adults, trying to build their own society until fear, conflict, and power struggles tear everything apart. More than 50 years later, CBS took an idea that sounded uncomfortably similar and turned it into a reality show. It was called Kid Nation, and almost from the moment it was announced, people were already questioning whether it should exist at all.
Welcome to Kid Nation.
The premise was simple on paper, but chaotic in practice. 40 children, ranging in age from 8 to 15, were taken to a former movie set town in New Mexico and told to create a functioning society with minimal adult help. They would cook, clean, organize leadership, and try to keep the town running for 40 days while cameras documented everything. Reporting at the time made clear just how controversial the concept was, especially because of the ages involved and the child labor questions it immediately raised.
Imagine a world with no adults. Just 40 kids with a chance to build their own society.
Our work is cut out for us.
City kids, country kids, rich, poor, and everything in between.
At first, it may have looked like an adventure, the kind of experiment television could market as empowering or educational. But almost immediately, the reality of the situation began to set in. The children were given physically demanding tasks from the start, including hauling food and supplies through the desert heat, despite their age and the lack of ordinary parental oversight.
I'm not going to be with my parents, there's no adults, and I think I'm going to die out here because there's nothing.
When night came, the situation hardly improved. They were given thin, dirty mattress pads to sleep on, and the conditions were far rougher than what most viewers would associate with a controlled television production.
Well, when we first started planning for dinner, I realized that a lot of us haven't done anything like this before.
Medical care was also a concern. While medics were present in case of serious emergencies, the children were expected to manage much of their day-to-day life on their own, including dealing with minor injuries and illness until things became severe enough for adults to step in. As the days went on, the experiment became increasingly chaotic. Basic hygiene broke down, children argued constantly, cooking and cleaning became sources of conflict, and the illusion that they were building some inspiring miniature society quickly gave way to the fact that they were still just children being placed under enormous pressure for entertainment.
I don't see any food. No food. It looks like all our laundry and all our water is frozen in.
At one point, the situation became concerning enough that authorities began taking notice. New Mexico officials received complaints about the conditions on set, including concerns about child welfare and labor law violations, and inspectors tried to investigate the production. Contemporary reporting confirms that labor questions and child safety issues became central to the controversy surrounding the show.
I think the town definitely really needs some law and order because the people are just doing whatever they want, whenever they want.
Inside the show itself, the children created a government and elected a town council. But instead of solving problems, that structure often created new conflicts and power struggles, making the environment even more unstable.
I find that really funny that you say you were nice to everybody on day one. You treat me like I'm not going to treat you good.
Although the production lasted 6 weeks, the strain was obvious enough that several children chose to leave before the experiment ended, unable or unwilling to continue under those conditions. When Kid Nation finally premiered on CBS in September 2007, the public reaction was intense. Critics and advocacy groups argued that the show had crossed ethical lines by placing children in a stressful, highly controlled environment and framing it as entertainment. CBS defended the production by likening it to a summer camp rather than a workplace, but that explanation did little to calm the larger controversy, especially given reports about waivers, injuries, and legal concerns. The series was never renewed beyond its first season. What makes Kid Nation so troubling in retrospect is not simply that it was chaotic, but that much of that chaos was exactly what made it valuable as television. The very things that would have been considered unacceptable in any ordinary setting became part of the show's appeal, which is why so many people still look back at it as one of the most reckless reality concepts ever put on air. Now, after a story where television pushed children into conditions far more intense than they should have faced, the next case takes us back to a much more ordinary live segment, only to show how quickly even something silly and harmless can turn serious. What begins as a cheerful morning segment quickly turns into something far more painful and unexpected, leaving both the audience and the presenters unsure how to react in real time. In 1998, reporter Melissa Sander from Fox 5 Atlanta was covering a winery festival in Georgia. As part of the segment, she participated in a traditional grape stomping contest, the kind of activity meant to feel playful and entertaining for viewers. She climbed onto a raised wooden platform where 2 barrels filled with grapes were positioned side by side, joining another participant as they stomped enthusiastically, trying to outdo each other while the camera rolled. The surface was slick with crushed grapes, but at first, everything appeared harmless and under control. As the segment came to an end, Sander, still laughing, attempted to squeeze in a few extra stomps, leaning forward slightly as she shifted her weight. That small movement was enough to cause her foot to slip on the wet surface. She lost her balance completely and fell off the platform, landing hard on her side, ribs first, against the ground below. For several seconds, she struggled to speak, gasping for air and clearly in severe pain, repeatedly saying that she could not breathe. The tone of the broadcast changed instantly as the anchors realized this was no longer part of the segment and halted the program.
We'll be back right after this.
What was not immediately visible to viewers was the extent of her injuries. Sander had fractured multiple ribs and required hospitalization, followed by a long and painful recovery period. Despite the seriousness of the accident, the clip spread rapidly online, becoming widely known as the Grape Lady video. Many people shared it for entertainment, often unaware that they were watching a genuine injury unfold. In later interviews, Sanders spoke about how difficult it was to see such a painful moment turned into viral humor while she was still recovering, highlighting the disconnect between what audiences perceive and what actually happens behind the scenes. Sometimes television becomes disturbing, not just because of what happens, but because of how easily audiences are encouraged to consume it as entertainment. And that tension sits at the center of this next show. Every episode of My Strange Addiction seemed designed to leave viewers caught somewhere between shock, fascination, and discomfort. The show searched across the country for people whose compulsions were not only unusual, but so extreme that they felt almost impossible to believe. It was never interested in common forms of addiction or dependency. What it wanted was something stranger, more visually shocking, and more likely to make viewers ask whether what they were seeing could possibly be real. And for 6 seasons, that is exactly what it delivered. One of the most memorable episodes focused on a woman named Cassie, whose grief over losing her husband had developed into an addiction that audiences found difficult to process.
First, I lick my finger, and I don't just dip it in. I swirl around to kind of feel and get it caked on there good. And then I just...
Another unforgettable segment followed a man named Nathaniel, who described himself as being in a romantic relationship with his car, speaking to it affectionately, taking it on dates, and treating it not as an object, but as a partner.
Love you, baby. It was love at first sight. His body and then his interior and everything just together just seemed to fit. And I just felt an instant connection.
Other episodes pushed into body image obsession and identity fixation, including people who spent huge amounts of money on surgery in an effort to resemble public figures or idealized versions of themselves.
Some people buy fancy cars or fancy mansions, and what I do with my money is I get surgery to look more like Justin Bieber.
And then there were the cases that felt almost impossible to accept at face value, including a woman who claimed to eat parts of her mattress.
My name is Jennifer, and I'm addicted to eating mattresses.
What made the show even more disturbing was that many of these compulsions were not just strange, but genuinely dangerous. One woman, for example, reportedly could not sleep without keeping a blow dryer running beside her, despite the obvious fire risk.
She, one night, turned on this blow dryer, and the sound of it, the warmth of it, just instantly put me to sleep. And from that night forward, I was...
As the series gained popularity, the addictions it featured seemed to become even more extreme, and that is exactly when some viewers began questioning whether the show could be trusted at all.
My name is Shannon, I'm 20 years old, and I'm addicted to drinking gasoline.
This episode in particular became a turning point for that skepticism, featuring a woman whose alleged dependence on gasoline struck many viewers as so outrageous that they began openly asking whether the series was fabricating or exaggerating its stories. That reaction grew into a much larger debate about the show itself. Online discussions questioned how some of the featured people could physically survive what they claimed to consume or do. And from there, the criticism broadened beyond whether the addictions were real into whether the show was helping anyone, even if they were. Because unlike programs centered on recovery or treatment, My Strange Addiction often seemed far more invested in spectacle than in care. It typically introduced a person, showcased the most shocking parts of their behavior, then ended with a brief, almost superficial intervention from a therapist or specialist. Critics argued that the show spent far more time gawking at the behavior than meaningfully addressing it. The result was a series that, for many viewers, felt less like a documentary about suffering and more like entertainment built out of it. After 6 seasons, the show ended in 2015, but clips from it continue to circulate online, often going viral with the same question attached to them. Were these stories genuine, exaggerated, or something in between? And that question may be the most lasting part of the show's legacy, because even years later, My Strange Addiction is remembered not only for what it depicted, but for how uncertain people still are about whether they were watching real struggles or a reality format pushing those struggles into something more extreme for the camera. The show also raised questions about what television chooses to do with people's vulnerability. The next case strips away all of that ambiguity and shows something much more immediate: a live demonstration that fails in the worst possible way. Yukino Kikuma stood calmly in front of the camera, secured to what was believed to be a reliable safety system, with everything appearing properly prepared for a routine demonstration. What no one realized at that moment was that something had already gone wrong, and within seconds, the segment would turn into a serious accident broadcast live. Kikuma, a 26-year-old reporter for Mezamashi TV on Fuji TV, had been assigned to demonstrate a rope evacuation device designed to show how people could escape safely from a building during an emergency. The demonstration took place on the 5th floor of the network's headquarters, with viewers expecting to see a controlled and gradual descent. Instead, as soon as the system was activated, the mechanism failed. Whether due to improper setup or equipment malfunction, the harness did not hold. Kikuma fell instantly, dropping from the window in an uncontrolled descent of nearly 15 meters before striking the ground below. The audience did not see the full impact, but they heard the immediate reaction from the production team as she disappeared from view, followed by urgent shouting and confusion as the broadcast cut away. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, suffering multiple fractures, internal injuries, and a prolonged period of unconsciousness. Her recovery took months, but remarkably, she survived without permanent spinal damage. An investigation later revealed that the safety system had not been properly secured, and essential checks had failed before the live demonstration. The incident led to significant backlash against Fuji TV, as viewers who had tuned in for a routine morning segment were instead confronted with a life-threatening accident. Even years later, the footage is rarely shown in full, largely because the seriousness of the moment speaks for itself. Yukino Kikuma's fall is the kind of TV moment people remember because a routine segment suddenly became life-threatening. The next story is chilling in a completely different way, because here, the danger was not visible at the time at all. It was sitting under the studio lights, hidden inside someone's backstory. Some of the world's most popular game shows have always relied on a simple idea: putting people under pressure and asking them to tell the truth, even when deception is part of the game. One of the most well-known examples of this was To Tell the Truth, a classic series built around a surprisingly clever concept. Each episode featured one real person with a unique or controversial background, accompanied by two imposters who would all claim to be that same individual. Sitting across from them was a panel of 4 celebrities, whose job was to question each contestant and figure out who was telling the truth. Every incorrect guess cost them money, which only added to the tension, as the imposters tried to stay convincing while the real person blended in just enough to avoid suspicion. In October of 1972, viewers tuning into the show were introduced to 3 men, all claiming to be Edward Wayne Edwards. At first, it seemed like just another unusual backstory, something designed to make the episode more interesting. But as the host began to read out details about the real Edwards, it became clear that this was no ordinary guest. He had once been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. According to the show, Edwards had left behind a life of crime that included car theft, robberies, and forgery, and was now presented as a reformed man, someone who had turned his life around and become a respected member of his community. In that lineup, the real Edwards stood as contestant number 3, calmly participating in a game where his past was treated as something he had already overcome. What made his story even more unusual was how open he had been about his earlier crimes. In his 1972 memoir, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, Edwards described his actions with a kind of pride, even explaining that he never wore a mask during robberies because he wanted to be recognized. He referred to himself as Ed Edwards, Master Crook, a man who, at the time, seemed to crave attention just as much as he did crime. On the surface, it looked like a redemption story, a former criminal appearing on national television to show that he had changed. But that image would not hold. In the years that followed, Edwards continued to drift in and out of prison throughout the 1980s, and although he was eventually released again, there were things about his past that had never been fully uncovered. What no one watching that episode in 1972 could have known was that his criminal history went far beyond theft and fraud. Behind the image of a reformed man was something much darker. For decades, a number of unsolved murders had remained scattered across different states, cases that seemed disconnected at the time. It wasn't until 2009 that everything began to unravel, and the reason it did wasn't because of a breakthrough in forensic evidence, but because of someone much closer to him, his own daughter. April Edwards began to suspect that her father might be connected to some of these cold cases, and as she started looking deeper, what she found disturbed her enough to contact the police. She pointed investigators towards specific cases from 1980 that she believed her father could be linked to, and that tip was enough to reopen an investigation. In July of 2009, Edward Wayne Edwards was arrested. Not long after, he confessed to multiple murders, including the killings of a couple in 1977, 2 victims in 1980, and even his own foster son in 1996. Investigators would later suggest that the true number of victims could be much higher, with some estimates reaching at least 15, though not all cases were ever confirmed. The revelation was shocking, not only because of the crimes themselves, but because of how visible Edwards had once been. Years earlier, he had appeared on national television, sitting under bright studio lights, presenting himself as a man who had already left his criminal life behind. After his arrest, theories began to spread online, with some people even attempting to link him to other infamous cases, including the Zodiac Killer, though those claims have never been definitively proven. What makes this story so unsettling is not just what Edwards did, but how easily he managed to exist in plain sight. At one point, he wasn't hiding from the public. He was part of it, telling his story, answering questions, and convincing people that the worst was already behind him, when in reality, it wasn't. What makes the Edward Wayne Edwards story so chilling is the realization that someone deeply dangerous once sat on television and passed as reformed, ordinary, even respectable. The next case, however, brings us back to a more immediate kind of on-air danger, where the threat was not hidden in hindsight, but exploded into view in real time. What was meant to be an exciting live segment for a children's television show quickly turned into one of the most dangerous on-air accidents in British broadcasting history. Anthea Turner was 29 years old at the time and had become a recognizable face on UP2U, a Saturday morning program broadcast on BBC One. The show was designed to be energetic and interactive, appealing to younger audiences with live segments and audience participation.
The show Up to You was a live Saturday morning children's television show that came from Manchester.
And Anthea, well, she's got the roving eye down at the Royal Tournament in Earls Court. Stand by your phones, here comes the show.
By July 15, 1989, Turner had established herself as a confident and engaging presenter, making her a natural choice to introduce a live stunt involving a motorbike rider and a series of controlled pyrotechnic effects known as flash pots. These effects were carefully timed to create a dramatic sequence of explosions as the rider passed through them, forming a visual wall of fire for the audience.
The big idea was that I would pick up from London and say, I'm supposed to be taking part in a motorbike display, but I can't see any motorbikes.
Turner's role was simply to stand at a safe distance and introduce the segment. However, a breakdown in communication between the production crew led to a critical timing error. The rider received a premature signal and accelerated forward before the area had been cleared. As the motorcycle reached the line of pyrotechnics, the system was triggered at exactly the wrong moment. The resulting explosion erupted directly beside Turner, sending a burst of flames and heat toward her and knocking her to the ground.
If you want something to happen to you on a...
Viewers, many of them children, watched in shock as the smoke cleared to reveal Turner lying on the ground, her hair singed and her clothing visibly damaged. The broadcast quickly cut away as crew members rushed in to assist her.
A few minutes ago, you might have just seen something a bit dangerous happen to Anthea. Just here to say she's okay, she's just gone to first aid.
The program was paused for several minutes, and concerned viewers began calling in, worried about her condition. Turner was taken to the hospital, where she was treated for burns that, while not life-threatening, were still serious and painful. The incident prompted an internal investigation by the BBC, which confirmed that safety protocols had not been properly followed. The miscommunication between crew members and the lack of final clearance checks created a situation where the stunt was executed before it was safe to do so. Despite the severity of the accident, Turner recovered and continued her career, eventually becoming one of the most recognizable figures in British daytime television. However, the incident remains a lasting example of how quickly live television can become dangerous when even a small error occurs. If Anthea Turner's accident shows how live television can go wrong in seconds, the next story proves that live broadcasting becomes even more disturbing when the chaos is not accidental at all. On November 22, 2016, a 19-year-old man named Anthony Gellia went live on Facebook from Jackson, Michigan, broadcasting what would quickly become a deeply disturbing and tragic sequence of events. At the time he started the stream, he appeared to be heavily intoxicated, likely under the influence of alcohol and possibly other substances, and his behavior was erratic, agitated, and increasingly unstable. As the live stream progressed, it became clear that he was extremely angry, though understanding exactly why was not immediately obvious. His speech was slurred and difficult to follow, and he struggled to communicate his thoughts clearly. At the same time, he was visibly holding a firearm, waving it around while continuing to drink, creating an atmosphere that quickly shifted from chaotic to dangerous.
You know what's funny? I could go over there right now and pop a pig in the head. I could go pop a pig in the head. I don't even like my life.
Thanks, stop.
I don't like my life. No laws, no nothing for me. I don't give a I got one in the chamber right now. Stop. I have no problem.
From what viewers were able to piece together, Anthony's anger was directed toward his younger brother, Noah. The two had a strained relationship, which had worsened after Anthony had been kicked out of the family home. That tension appears to have escalated further when Noah allegedly sent him a threatening message, something that seemed to push Anthony into a state of heightened emotional instability and ultimately led to the live stream.
Right now. Almost. But almost isn't enough, right? Oh, there's a cop. I'm so scared. What's up? What's up, Ryan? Can someone talk to me? All right, who wants some beef? Who wants some beef? All right, if there's just one of you, then I'll fight you. But if there's more than one, I'll shoot. What's up? What's up? I'm crazy. Guaranteed. Guaranteed crazy.
During the early part of the broadcast, Anthony made a series of vague but increasingly concerning threats toward his brother and others connected to him. While this kind of behavior might have remained confined to online threats in other situations, in this case, it escalated beyond words. Still streaming live, Anthony made the decision to go to the house where Noah was staying. What followed unfolded in real time for those watching. He arrived at the residence and opened fire inside the home. While it is possible that his intention was to intimidate or scare his brother, the situation quickly spiraled out of control. The shot he fired did not hit Noah. Instead, the bullet traveled through a basement door and struck someone else inside the house. Behind that door was 26-year-old Brittany Southwell, who was holding her 7-month-old baby at the time. The bullet hit her in the back, causing severe internal injuries. Emergency services responded quickly, and she was transported to the hospital, but despite efforts to save her, She later died from her injuries. The tragedy shocked both the local community and those who had witnessed parts of the incident online. What began as a volatile and confusing live stream had resulted in the death of an innocent person who had no direct involvement in the conflict. Anthony was arrested shortly afterward and taken into custody. However, what further disturbed investigators and the public alike was his behavior following the incident.
Crazy? Who's crazy? Who's crazy? Who's crazy?
Stop it.
Who's crazy?
Give me that. You have to
Go. Get out of here.
You're dumb. You're being dumb.
What's up? What's up? See me in the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. See me there.
During interrogation, he showed little to no remorse for what had happened. At one point, he stated that he could have killed everyone in the house if he had wanted to, presenting the situation in a way that suggested a lack of understanding of the gravity of his actions. In May 2018, Anthony stood trial for the killing of Brittany Southwell. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not just the outcome, but the way it unfolded in front of an audience. The live stream captured a moment where anger, substance use, and access to a weapon combined in a way that escalated far beyond control, turning what might have been an isolated outburst into a fatal incident witnessed in real time. It serves as a stark reminder of how quickly situations can spiral when emotions override judgment, especially when those moments are broadcast live with no opportunity to intervene before irreversible damage is done. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.